Hello, everyone. Welcome to this webinar. It is a panel with these lovely advocates for history education, education in general. We are very lucky to be here with the three of these folks and everybody in the audience. I'm joined by my colleague at NCHE, Shauna, and she's here to just kind of do some stuff in the background, but we're so thrilled to be here. Very honored to have this conversation with these three fantastic folks. I want to let them each introduce themselves if that sounds good. Oh, thank you, Shauna. Thank you. If everybody could just introduce themselves in the chat, let us know where you're coming from. We just want to know who we're in the room with. So I can let anybody go first.
I could go first. I'm probably first alphabetically, I guess, for my first name. I'm Annie Whitlock. I am a history and social studies professor at Grand Valley State University, which is in Western Michigan. I also serve on the school board in my local district where I live, where my kids go to school, and where I graduated from. So that's an interesting dynamic. But yeah, that's me.
I'm Kathy Fleischer, another Michigander. I live in Ann Arbor, Michigan. I spent 32 years as a professor of English education at Eastern Michigan University and was a high school teacher before that. Now I'm in sort of a retirement phase, but the big project, which I'll talk about later tonight, is working on advocacy with teachers.
Hello, everyone. My name is Jean Hill. I serve as an instructional coach in Northwest Arkansas and have worked closely with NCHE, participating in their most recent program, the Rural Experience in America, and work closely with history educators throughout the state of Arkansas.
So we're joined by folks with a lot of really lovely experience who have touched a lot of lives, education in all their various ways. I'm sure they're all everybody's favorite teacher or board member or what have you. So I know that all of you have rich experience in advocacy specifically. Can you tell me about what advocacy means to you in your individual context of like school board member, advocacy, leadership, and educator? And whoever wants to join in can just jump in.
Well, Annie went first last time, so I'll jump in to go first this time. So I want to preface it with, so I'm not in history education, but what I've been doing, as I mentioned, was this thing called everyday advocacy. And the idea behind this is it's a movement for teachers to be able to become advocates, to be able to think how they can make it part of their everyday life. So what we offer is some structured approaches to change making in your local settings. The goal is for us is to change the public narrative surrounding schools and teachers and learning. We believe that teachers are the experts in what is the knowledge base of education. Teachers know more about what's going on in the classroom than other people. And it doesn't always seem that way when we look at who's making decisions about what's happening in schools. So our goal is to kind of change the public narrative surrounding schools. We believe it's teacher-centered, teacher-driven. We try to help teachers figure out ways to lay the groundwork surrounding particular issues. In other words, to be proactive before a problem arises, and then to respond appropriately when there's something contested. So we kind of think of it as small a advocacy rather than capital A advocacy, because we think that teachers can do this as part of and not separate from their regular lives as teachers. So that's what we do. It's teacher driven, it's teacher centered. We believe in teachers making this as part of their everyday life. We talk about how you can do this in ways that are smart, safe, savvy, and sustainable. Smart is knowing your issue, knowing your community, knowing the context you're in. Safe is developing allies, so you're not really doing this by yourself. Savvy is like organizing 101, like how do you identify decision makers? How do you frame your issue? How do you figure out strategies and tactics? And sustainable, how can you do it and not have it take over your life? How you can do a small thing which can make a big difference. So that's what the everyday advocacy part is all about.
Yeah,
Awesome.
I can
Go
relate
ahead,
to
Amy.
that a lot, Kathy, because that's sort of what that advocacy is part of your everyday life. My area of research and teaching is actually elementary level social studies and history education, which has been sort of disappearing for a really long time. So most of my career has been advocating for students and advocating for teachers as ways to make social studies into the elementary grades as easy and simple as possible because students deserve it. And I've carried that into my work at the Michigan Council for the Social Studies. We've been advocating legislators in Michigan to try to get more funding for teacher professional development and elementary social studies, things like that. But in my school board, it's a whole different thing. I have to be broader than just history and social studies advocacy. So it's funny you say, Kathy, you're not into history. I've been like now diving into, the literature behind banning books and all these different things that are coming up in school board meetings that, I'm having to attend now. So I'm having to sort of broaden my advocacy quite a bit, but still being that like squeaky wheel for social studies on my school board too.
So from an educational lens, I think there are a lot of opportunities in advocacy, especially from the student and community perspective. So there is a daily opportunity to work with students in my building and my district to position them to elevate their concerns as citizens of our community and as also citizens of our educational system to help drive change that is needed to enhance their learning experiences. Working within the educational sector, we get the chance to partner with so many different types of community partners and stakeholders that can support this work. So I think for folks in education, I see this role almost as a connector to help elevate what are our most curious questions around advocacy work right now, and who are the best spokespeople to speak to those questions and elevate those concerns to the parties that may need to hear them or may need to engage in conversation around what comes next and what solutions either exist in the world or could exist to bring clarity to some of the concerns of the time.
Thank you. I really appreciate those perspectives. So I know that advocacy isn't always, there's not usually a smooth road ahead, but I think we do want to hear, I would love to hear about like your success stories and also to counter that, maybe some specific frustrations that you've run into when trying to advocate for yourselves or your teachers or the concerns of your parents' children, something like that.
Do we want to keep going in a circle again, friends? Or I can jump in.
That's a good idea.
Okay, so yes, the frustration, of course, is for all of us who are involved in education, is to watch how many teachers are terrified right now of advocating because they're afraid of being fired, they're afraid of being targeted, they're afraid of being doxxed, they're afraid of all of those things, which are, it's the real world, it's what's happening to teachers right now. And that is terrifying to me. It's terrifying how many people are leaving the profession. As somebody who has been an English educator at a university for a long time, the way the programs are just, I don't know if it's like this for you, Annie, but it's been going down rapidly. People are not going into teaching in the way that they used to, and that's a pretty terrifying thing. And I guess I think that's why figuring out how to do advocacy in ways that you're not going to get fired, you're not going to be that teacher that everybody looks the other way when you walk down the hall. To find ways to do that, I think is what we have to really focus on to keep teachers knowing what they're doing, feeling strongly about what they're doing, finding soft ways to advocate, to help make change. And so I guess a story I wanted to share with you is a teacher I had worked with whose name is Sarah. And what she had done, instead of the traditional back to school night, curriculum night in her school, she invited the parents of her 9th grade students to come in for an evening of thinking about reading and writing. And what she started with is she had the parents write for a little bit about a time a book had made a difference in their lives. And then she asked them to write a little bit about a time that writing became important in their lives. And the parents went around and spoke about these different occasions. You know, they wrote, then they shared. And the kinds of things they shared were that time I read a book and I was cuddled up on my couch and the snow was falling outside and I was so invested in the book I couldn't put it down. I read for hours. I read when I was a kid, I had the flashlight reading past my, all of those stories. When they talked about writing, they talked about writing for real audiences. They talked about when they wrote that obituary for their mother, when they at work had to write an email and they wrote and rewrote and had somebody else read it to make sure it said the right thing. So they started talking about all these things that are the sort of basis of how we teach reading and writing in ways that make a difference in kids' lives. And so what Sarah was able to do at the end of this is she could say, let's look at the themes. What did you notice? What did you hear each other saying? And then she said, that's what I'm trying to do in my classroom. And so she starts out by doing this proactive moment. She gets parents to understand what she's doing, and these parents become allies and advocates alongside her because they understand it differently because it's been personal. And I think that's such a wonderful example because it's not doing something that's in the parent's face or flies in the face of what the administration said. She's just getting parents to talk about their experiences and using those experiences to help them understand what literacy looks like in the classroom.
Those proactive ways in that there's an ebook, right, is what you would call it, that Everyday Advocacy is put together, that is a long PDF.
A playbook.
Playbook, thank you. They have really fantastic ways talking about proactive and reactive, I believe, ways of advocating. I loved reading about that story of, making the reading and writing not just scores, not just books that you pick out of a set so that your child gets up there to where they need to be, but like really having those personal connections. It's such a great way of advocating because it sticks up for the humanity that the teachers are looking for in the first place. That recognition of like personhood. And I'm not doing anything wrong by wanting your students to be able to think for themselves and critically read these materials. So I would definitely check out those Everyday Advocacy playbook because we can talk more about that later. I just wanted to throw in a plug.
For those
sorry, I don't mean to jump in.
For those who said in the chat, well, you typed it in wrong. I did type it in wrong the first time, but it's in the chat now. And if you go to that front page, there's a link where you can download the playbook for free. Thank you, Claire, for bringing that up.
Yeah.
I guess if I'm going around, my next, we're going around in a circle. So my advocacy has been based in advocating for elementary social studies, like advocating for the importance of social studies. And even kind of before this anti-DEI crusade that's been happening, that's been an uphill battle. So for me, a lot of the frustration as a school board member has been seeing this happen in real time, in my daughter's district, which is the one that raised me. So it's been quite an uphill battle for me. I've seen like, for example, our district will talk about purchasing curriculum for ELA, and they'll talk about how they purchased curriculum for math like 3 years ago. And I'm like, great, like what's the social studies curriculum that we are working on? And it's like crickets from the curriculum director. Or what, like, our AP scores are good. I'm like, fantastic. Like, your high school teachers are doing amazing work. But how can we support our elementary teachers so that our high school teachers have an easier job making those AP scores go up? Nothing. Our reading and math goals are what we talk about the most, right? And reading those. So I seeing that on like a firsthand account of this, like on the ground level, is sort of like, oh my gosh, yeah, I'm still doing this, like decades now we're still trying to advocate for social studies. But what's been a success, I think, is since now, you're starting to see this pushback for social studies education. This push, and I do think a pushback toward, diversity education, pushing back on, teaching critical thinking, teaching inquiry is a pushback on social studies. and English too, but I definitely see as social studies and history ed as a target. But then as a success, I see parents coming to school board meetings to speak in defense of, diversity, equity, and inclusion teaching in our schools. And I'm like, you guys exist too. Like it's been great to see the loud voices on that side come and support teachers people coming to school board meetings and saying, we need to trust our librarians to have these books that our kids want to read, like and let them do it, their freedom to read. It's been fantastic to see that come up. So like every time I start to feel like, oh, this is an uphill battle, I see parents come in and speak out. I'm like, yay, I'm not by myself. This is great. So I got a lot of work to do, but the hope still stays there, which is good.
That's so good to hear. I never hear about parents saying, hey, let's think about this another way. It's usually from my, position, all I hear about are the things that happen at school boards, which are, reading those passages from those books or just straight up book bans.
Oh no, there's a lot of that.
For sure there's a lot of that. I
Don't
just
get me
never
wrong.
hear the other side of the coin.
And I would say perhaps those parents speaking in defense of social studies is maybe what you would call reactive advocacy, but it's there, right? Like maybe they were coming because of those other loud voices on that side, but I don't care. As a school board member, I really love to hear that other side of it. So
Yeah.
There are definitely opportunities in advocacy from an educational standpoint. I think some of the wins lie in allowing students to feature their work in social studies educational experiences in the classroom and beyond. For my particular setting, that looks like students sharing their National History Day participation and projects and inviting the community in, and also working with some local historical organizations to help develop community-based projects that the students lead and we as educators get to support and facilitate. So essentially, students are historians in their own neighborhood, in their own backyard, or amplifying parts of history that are meaningful to them. I think most important as an advocate for student experiences in the social studies, it's important to just get out and network and be in community with others who care about the same kinds of things, both within and beyond a school building. There's a lot of strength in community voice. And I think of some of the successes in advocacy that I've seen where I currently am and in historic practice as well, definitely lie in those sidewalk conversations, I like to call them, where I might be at a community event with parents or people interested in social studies education who can and are willing to engage in conversation, potentially be a school-based community partner in advocacy work, and most importantly, support students in that work as well in a way that is meaningful to all. I think we get to be creative in this current year and moving forward about how advocacy looks, and maybe it doesn't look like it always has, but I believe that there's a strong opportunity for everyone to advocate for the importance of social studies education from very young learners all the way to very wise learners in our world.
I love that. I'm curious, I would love to hear, I know you were in the Rural Experience in America project. Was it 2 or 3 years?
It was a 3-year experience,
Okay,
and I'm
yeah.
fortunate even beyond that particular experience to extend many of those projects into my current year and current work.
I love that, and I know that program director, Regina, I'm sure she knows, but I'm sure that puts a smile on her face too. Can we hear about maybe one of the things that your students worked on and like that fostered their love of local history?
Absolutely. So as part of that 3-year experience, I worked with students to engage in lots of different types of projects. One I will speak to is the project where students took some oral histories that were recorded in our community and refined those into student-facing podcasts. So students could hear voices of community members that they may have heard about, may have interacted with. Some were even within our school system, and really look to those individuals as leaders, leaders who may speak the same language as those students speak, or participate in the same types of cultural activities. Moving forward, students worked with art educators in our district to develop a community cookbook, really capturing the primary sources of food in our community. And so again, both of these projects were almost dreamed up by students in partnership with educators. And both of those projects and more have carried forward into our current work. This year, my campus is working on volume 3 of this cookbook series that I think will continue for the foreseeable future. And those are both digitally and available digitally and in print, so that we as members of our community can analyze those as primary sources and also connect with families, not only within our school, but also within our community, to allow a safe space for families to share something meaningful and also work together to advocate for opportunities like this for students moving forward.
I love that. I want to get my hands on one of those cookbooks. I just love the idea of food as a primary source or a recipe as a primary source. I am so thrilled for those kids that they got the chance to like really have such a tangible history, and then know that they'll have that for a long time moving forward. I love that. And then also I want to return back to you, Jean, and then maybe we can do a reverse circle. You mentioned the importance of building community allies, both sidewalk conversations, people outside the school building, but also in. I know that if I was a teacher in a school right now, I would be very scared to bring something up alone. So I want to hear about like your process of building and maybe sustaining relationships with allies.
So I think it starts with questions, and often as an educator, I get the privilege to lead on the questions students elevate. Um, I also think that a lot of our stakeholders who support education are very curious learners as well. And so in this role, I guess I get to lean on my critical friends, my helpful friends, um, to help think about how could advocacy look, what does that look like, and how can educators be involved almost as connectors in that conversation. As an educator, I also lean deeply on primary sources, because as a history educator especially, I know those are essential to really understand the impact of history over time. And often through those analysis protocols, questions or connections will bubble up that will organically open doors for continued conversation and local community impact, or thinking about historically relevant events that are happening right now. And those conversations and really continual unpacking of resources feel like really helps spark the next steps in conversation wherever they may go.
Are we coming back around here? Reverse circle. Yeah, yeah, it's been really interesting, Jean, to hear you talk about like working locally, working with local history groups. And that's been my, like, I guess a piece of learning for me about building allies for advocacy is to kind of don't be afraid to be social and go talk to people that you've never talked to before. That's never really been a problem for me. If I'm being honest, I'm big into just talking to people, but it can be like a little awkward and you have to kind of just be like, all right, I'm going to show up to this meeting or I'm going to, join this group and then just see what happens. Because I found a lot of people in my community that are, supportive of local schools, supportive of teaching accurate history, supportive of kids' freedom to read books they want to read. And I wouldn't have known those people existed in my community if I hadn't been like, all right, I'll show up to this thing. I heard there was a group of people gathering to talk about this and just showing up and not being like, oh, I should bring I'm not going to know anybody there, so I won't go. Um, and I've made a lot of allies that way. And a lot of it being, I would say like intergenerational. A lot of like older people in my community are really concerned about, um, I guess, the state of public schools in Michigan at the moment and how things are going. Um, and they're not afraid to, start up a protest. They're not afraid to come to school board meetings, and getting to know some of these people has been really great. Even some people in our community that I would say are typically lean very like politically conservative. It's been interesting to see those people still be politically conservative, but also be able to say, yeah, but the school system is doing well. We need to just kind of let our teachers, their expertise, like we need to just let them be, let them do what they need to do. And so that's been really interesting to kind of get to know that group and maybe bust up some misconceptions that I had about those people as well. So yeah, it's getting out of your comfort zone, I guess, to talk to some newer people and build allies that way.
Annie, I want to build on something that you just said. I think another really great pathway for advocacy is just inviting people to become historians in their local neighborhoods and their local communities, inviting them to partner with students or community members on some of the types of projects that I named. Often weaken any barriers that may exist. And once we have that face-to-face connection, I think there's a lot of strength in next steps based on the human need and the human connection to the work.
Yeah, you can find a common interest even in people that you're like, oh, really? Okay. But then you can like local history or whatever it might be. Yeah.
I really love what both of you are saying, and I'm going to keep adding in the exact same light of this. Like one of the things that I learned from studying what community organizers do is like there's sort of buckets of people you put in, like those who are, on your side, those who are opposed, but those who are undecided. And I think that's a really interesting way to think about it because so many of the undecided people are people that when you just talk to, you find that common ground. And you might find a shared interest, I think, as you guys were just referring to, but also shared values. And I think those shared values sometimes get talked about in different ways. But when you get down to it and you're just talking about, we want our kids to be successful. We want our kids to learn how to read. We want our kids to understand the history. Like there's these shared values that cut across. One teacher I was working with who was trying to make a lot of changes in his school said that one of the things that he always would do is at lunchtime he would go sit with a different group of people. Like instead of just going and sitting with your own people that you're in your echo chamber and talking about the same thing, he would go sit with different people or at a department meeting. And I feel like it's what we have to do, as uncomfortable as it makes us sometimes, because we've pigeonholed people into these different buckets with it. One of the people that I've learned a lot from is this organizer named Marshall Gantz, and he talks about the public narrative and how we shift the public narrative. He says, is we talk about the story of self, the story of us, and the story of now. So you start by thinking of your own story in a particular subject, and then you get in conversation with other people, and you start to discover what's the story of us, like what are the values that we share, what are the things that go across. And then to think about, okay, what's the story of now? Knowing that we do have some kinds of shared values. How do we move forward from that? And that's been a way of thinking that's been really useful to me to try to get over myself, and and talk with people that I might not be as comfortable with because I think I know what their values are, and I get proved wrong time and time again.
My brain is making this image of like, we have to get the cargo from one side to another. I really need you to understand the importance of the message that I'm trying to get across. We can't if there's no bridge. And like, I even like talking to strangers, you know, go to a coffee shop and somebody is very clearly maybe not going to agree with me on most things. I can find a bridge so that I can get across the information that I think that you really should have, which like what you're saying, we want our kids to be successful. We want history to be prioritized. We want critical thinking to be a value that is leaned on heavily. You know, like those are things that we don't disagree on. There's just a lot when we see somebody that we instantly disagree with. It's just, for me, it's, I get uncomfortable. My body tenses up, you know, and it's difficult. There's an added layer of that when you're a teacher with your position on the line, potentially changing that, having to look at people in a different way, because that puts you in a vulnerable position. Yeah.
But knowing that
Um,
that you're not always right in what you think about, right? You're not always right in putting that person in that box.
yeah.
I was
Yeah.
I was talking to a teacher, or he's actually a professor in Florida today. I interviewed him for a podcast for our YouTube station, but he was talking about how he's in Florida and he was invited to be on a committee where they had removed 16 books from all the school libraries. Um, and he was invited to join this committee, and it had teachers, it had students, back to some of the stuff you were saying, Jean. So it had students, it had guidance counselors, it had parents, it had parents, the parents who had complained about the books, parents who were maybe open to thinking differently. And they, as a team, over 16 weeks, read each of the books and talked about them, and kids talked about them. And they found these common values. And at the end of the time, hard to believe, but it's wonderful, all 16 books went back on the shelves, right? They decided that those were books were okay, but it came from conversation. And this teacher was, or this professor was describing the first time he went to the meeting, he was like angry and he was, you know, like, who are you people to be saying these books shouldn't be on the bookshelves? And then he discovered the more he talked to them that they did have values in common. So I know that's like, it seems fairy tale-ish, but it happened there. And I think it is happening in some places. It's not everywhere, but it does happen in some places when you sit down and really read and talk about this stuff together.
Well, that's really important. Thank you. We already have a question. I wanted to say really quickly before we move on, if folks have any questions for the panel, there's a Q&A section at the bottom if you want to put your questions in. I had a next question about examples that have inspired you in your history or in your advocacy work, maybe examples from history or specific role models or movements. Yeah, whoever wants to jump in. We don't necessarily have to do an order to whatever you want to do.
Well, I can jump in with mine. Mine might be a little bit different, perhaps. I don't know. Um, I so speaking of local history, I just my side hobby is a local history podcast that I do about my grandfather's time as a B-17 pilot in World War II. He wrote a ton of letters during that time, and then we read some of the letters and we'd give like local history context and global history context. And it's been really interesting because I've been learning a lot about my grandfather who passed away like, you know, over 25 years ago. And through these letters, like I didn't know about him before. And one of these I read recently, and it was kind of like, oh, it was a big sort of like inspiration for me. He talked about he was writing home to his parents and he said that he had asked to go overseas in combat, and he'd been writing his parents and were hoping he would really just get to stay in the US and be a flight instructor, right? They didn't want him going over and fighting the war in Europe. And then he wrote them this letter and he said, I'm sorry, but I have to tell you that I asked to do it. I asked to go over there and fly. And he said, I just feel like he essentially said, I'm paraphrasing a little bit, but he said he felt like he had expertise. He was a pilot before the war, and he had expertise. He could fly and he felt like he could contribute. And so he wanted to contribute his piece, his expertise to this bigger, this bigger picture. And he'd said that, he felt like he felt like he needed to do something to help his family, to make sure the world was safer. And he wouldn't feel right if he didn't play a part in this at all, in this little piece. Just a little piece, right? He's just one soldier among all these things. But like to him, he was like, no, I have to have a hand in this in some way. He didn't say it as nicely as that. It was a little cruder in his letter, but maybe some choice words about Hitler in these letters. But I read that and went, oh my gosh, that's essentially what I'm trying to do, right? Like I have expertise in history education. I'm trying to be like a tiny little pebble in this big thing, but just to say, okay, I could join my local school board. Like I have expertise that I could contribute to my little town of 3,000 people. Like it doesn't have to be massive. I can do my one little bit. And I felt like connected to my grandfather in that way, even though this was written like 80 years ago. Like, yeah, I also don't think I could. I want to be able to say, like, I was able, I did one little thing, like one thing that I could contribute one little thing over the course of this. I really believe that that will eventually have a ripple effect. I do believe my grandfather's time in the service in World War II had an effect, whether he, liked it or not. Um, so yeah, so he's sort of my advocacy role model, even though he wouldn't say that. If he were alive today, I don't think he would probably say, "Oh no, stop, that's crazy." But it felt like that to me, and it was interesting to come across that 80 years later and sort of be the words I needed to hear in that moment. It's so strange. So he's not anybody famous, but it's definitely from history. So that definitely
I
counts.
love that. I love that. Thank you for sharing that with us. I think that he did, obviously, beyond the scope of what he did for the country, he had that effect on you and then the people that you affect on your board, like
Yeah,
in the same way that what you're saying is going to impact somebody in the chat potentially, like he's having that ripple effect very clearly in front of us.
yeah,
So
yeah, that's true.
Well, I have a bunch of different role models for this work. I mean, my biggest one is my husband, who's done environmental advocacy for his whole career. That has been what he does. And when I was a teacher, a high school teacher, and I would come home really frustrated at the end of the day about how nobody listened to me or whatever, he used to say to me, "Well, you know what you should do?" And for many years, I just like, whatever. And then I started reading the words and the works of people who did organizing in all kinds of fields, from like public health to voting rights to environmental stuff. And there are just so many people over the years who've been so smart about how they do it. And as I started reading that stuff, I just started seeing like this is what teachers do all the time. So it's sort of like the teachers are my role model too, because teachers are natural advocates, right? Um, but one person in particular whose words really always hit me were a woman named Grace Lee Boggs, who passed away, a Michigander, Detroiter, who did a lot of fabulous advocacy work. And one of her quotes that sticks with me that I love is, "Just being angry, just being resentful, just being outraged does not constitute a revolution." And I feel like we spend so much time staying in the anger of some of this, and her words and like all the work that she did, you know, in education and in other things in Detroit were really important to me. So I mention her as somebody who was great too. I say read her stuff. She's really smart and really fun to listen to.
Well, Kathy and Annie, you have both inspired me with people I need to learn more about. And like both of you, I have so many great advocates in my life and advocates that I have learned about, who I continue to learn from in practice. Some family members come to mind, including my late grandmother. But one individual that I think about almost daily is John Scott, who was a civil rights and voting rights activist in Northeast Louisiana. And he advocated for and really secured a pathway for all people in the state of Louisiana to be able to vote when there were many restrictions for some groups of people long into times where voting rights should have been an opportunity for all. And I think to his work often realizing that it took him 25 years to work with a group of people to make that happen, reminding me that it's important to sustain efforts for the things we care the most about. And I think that's true in educational practice as we work to master things, as students work to master things. But also in thinking about how those sustained small steps can really create change beyond what we can fathom. And I think about that in my own work in education, the work I do day to day, the work I do with students, never knowing what that ripple impact may be, but to be very thoughtful about the ways that I show up every day, the ways I support the humanness of the humans in my circles and my own humanness, and the way that I participate as a citizen in all of the communities of which I'm a part, and how important it is to remember that even though, we all show up, there are other people looking to us as inspirational individuals in advocacy in the same way that we have talked about people we admire. So it is so very important to remember our potential effect on the world, and to use that power in a way that is meaningful for change that we want to see.
Yeah, I have a question that I didn't send you guys ahead of time. I do, what you said about the small sustained steps, it's hard to sit in that kind of dissonance of, I'm gonna make these small sustained steps every day, but I don't know how large this ripple will end up being. How do you reckon with not knowing what the outcome of your actions will be?
I think if when you look at, here I am, not a historian, I'm going to say a historical thing. When we look at the things that we've just been talking about, and when you see the ripples that have happened, I think it gives me um, some confidence that the things that we're doing now will have the ripple down the way. But it's, as you said, it's hard to sit in it at the moment, especially when you see we have to do big change rather than thinking about the small steps. But from an historical perspective, that's what we see all the way along. The people I admire, it's the small things that would build and build and build. So I think I carry that confidence by seeing what's happened. And any of us who are teachers and have been teachers for a long time, when that student who was not the student that you thought was ever listening to you during the time comes back to you and says, "You changed my life." Right? Teachers are used to that. We don't see it always at the moment, but we have seen enough examples of it down the road of the small things we do as teachers take effect. So I guess that's it for me, like looking to history, looking to what we've already done as teachers, and you know it can happen.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say. I think teachers are used to it being like a slow burn, right? Like you don't necessarily know or see the immediate impacts of what you're doing, and you might not ever get to see it, right? Like that student you impacted might never come back and tell you either. You just have to sort of maybe you're with them, maybe you're not. And if you get lucky, they come back and say, "Oh, you did this for me," and you're like, "Yes, it worked." Yeah, teachers have always just sort of known this is part of the gig. For me, it is whether or not like I feel like I've done my best, right? Do I feel like something am I advocating in a way that I feel like I'm proud of? Could I tell, would my own children be able to say, oh, yeah, my mom did try. She did this, she did this, she did this. Like that matters to me more than anything. So if I feel good about that, if I feel like, the people I truly care about in my like immediate circle could be able to say like, yeah, she was really out there, like she was doing it, whether it worked or not, or whatever it might be, then I'm content. I'm content with that. If I didn't just get angry, right, like Grace Lee Boggs says, and just complain and just sit on my butt, then I feel good about it.
It sounds like it's more of an intrinsic thing, right? Than kind of the extrinsic, seeing the
I mean,
exact
obviously, I want to
results.
make, I would love to make big change really, really fast. That'd be fantastic. I feel
Yeah.
really great. But like Kathy said, you have to kind of accept that's not really how things have ever really worked historically. So yeah, then you have to rely on your intrinsic motivation. Like, do you feel good about this? Do you feel like you are really doing what you can do in this moment? And if you do, then I feel good about it. I can be cool with it.
Yeah, I'm gonna butcher it, but there was this great quote from one of our webinars the other day that was like, what keeps me going is the fact that my enemies, which is, I don't tend to think of people as my enemies, but from her perspective, definitely enemies. Is the fact that my enemies could have a change of heart at any given moment. I've been thinking about that for the last couple days. I've never thought about things from that perspective,
Sure.
and we don't see changes of heart very often, but we do see acknowledgments of humanity, I guess. So I'm just throwing that out there anyways. Clary Jean, I don't mean to jump in front of you.
You're great. I think what you elevated, Claire, absolutely resonates with what I've been thinking, that in our work, we have to think with a hopeful future in mind and really envision what is this ideal future that I would like concerning this thing I'm advocating about, or what I like for myself, for my family, for the young people in my life that I impact. Um, and I also think in the work of advocacy, it's important to think, what would my younger self like to see in the world? Like, what did I need from the perspective of whoever I might or whatever I might be advocating for? That's something that I think about. Even the change that I've experienced in my own lifetime has come really standing on the shoulders of people who have done the work before me, to think, what could a better and brighter and sustainable future look like for these up and coming young people or for this particular community. And I think it's so important to realize that in any work that we do, to elevate our voice or the voices of others, we are part of something bigger than ourselves. And um, it's always helpful to remind myself that I'm not the only one out there trying to make a better tomorrow for all of us. And so I really try to stay grounded in that connectedness, and also celebrate the small wins. I can tell on this call that a lot of us get up in the morning with the hope to change the world in mind. And I think it's so important as we close out each day to think about, how did we accelerate even a micro change to work toward that goal?
I love that. I love
One-
that. Micro change.
100% agree with that. And I think there's another quote from another person I really admire, who's an environmental organizer and activist, who says, optimism is a political act. Those who benefit from the status quo are perfectly happy for us to think nothing is going to get better. In fact, these days, cynicism is obedience. And I love that quote too. It's by someone named Alex Steffen. I love that quote too, because that optimism is a political act, right? It's so important to think, yes, these small changes are going to make a difference.
Wow. What was the name of the person? Because now I'm going to want that quote on the bottom of my desktop monitor.
It's Alex Steffen, Steffen.
That's so good. Thank you for sharing that with us. I think that's something that everybody everywhere should take a listen to. I want to jump into a Q&A section and then come back to one last question that I have from the panel. I'm going to let Shauna do the questions from the audience.
Thank you so much for sharing all of your vast experience and expertise with the group tonight. I think we're at a critical crossroad right now, so this conversation is even more important than ever. So thank you again. We have a question from Rob in the chat, and I think it's a good one. Could you speak to the role of organizations such as unions like the American Federation of Teachers or the National Educators Association or professional groups to mobilize large numbers of teachers to engage in advocacy for policy and changes at the various levels? So that's a pretty big question to dissect. So whoever wants to jump in first.
Well, I'm a
Thanks,
part of a
Shannon.
couple different organizations that are trying to do just this, so I can at least weigh in on what we've been working on. So there's kind of two advocacy pieces I'm with. I'm advocating. I also advocate for um, social studies teachers through my role in the Michigan Council for the Social Studies. I've been a part of that organization since I was a first year teacher, like a million years ago. And we have been trying to collect voices of teachers and share those to legislators. So Michigan legislators, they want to hear from teachers, but teachers are busy during the day teaching. So we've at MCSS are trying to find ways that we can get their voice quickly and easily to legislators for those of us that have more flexible time, like we can get there. So like I would advocate, I brought, us with the Michigan Council that have more flexible jobs, like, I don't teach every day in my professor work. We collected all these teacher testimonies. We took them physically like to Lansing and was like, let's hear from these teachers. So it can be a barrier to advocacy because teachers are like, well, I have a job, I'm busy, I'm doing all these things, all this stuff is happening during the day. We're trying to use maybe our flexibility to their advantage and help them out. Like, all right, we'll bring you to them, we'll bring them to you, we'll try to facilitate that. In my school board role, I've seen firsthand how really influential our local teachers union, right? Like our district educational association has been in rallying around teachers who have been threatened by other community members. We had, a librarian in our district be harassed and doxxed by a parent over books in the library. And our union rallied very, very quickly, amassed signatures, sent letters to, and I'm on the receiving end of these letters as a board member, and I'm impressed by the way that they were able to kind of rally everybody together in our district, put together an email campaign to us board members within a very short amount of time and pack school board meetings. When they are interested in helping like an individual, especially in like a small town like that, like ours, yeah, they're able to really rally everybody together quite quickly, and it's effective. It's effective. We had, as a school board, had to address the fact that we were getting like 20 emails a day from the union about this particular issue. We had to speak about it. We had to we ended up doing a board resolution because they were packing the meeting. So it was effective. And again, it might seem small because it's just in our, like I said, our little district, but it mattered. It made a big deal, certainly to their fellow member that was getting harassed, but also as a message to the rest of us too. So that I know unions can be effective in doing that. That's why they're there. That's what they're supposed to do.
In my area, it's things like the National Council of Teachers of English. It is PEN America. It's the American Library Association. All of those groups are doing amazing work to help give teachers the knowledge and the information they need to be able to move forward. So, for example, every time PEN America publishes a report that talks about the books that are being banned and why they're being banned and how they're being banned, that helps. When I talked earlier about working in ways that are smart, safe, savvy, and sustainable, that helps people work in smart ways because they have knowledge of what's going on with that. National Council of Teachers of English does similar kinds of things and putting together rationales for books so that you don't have to be alone in you're doing this. These organizations have your back and they can help provide cover for you. They can help you have information that you don't have time individually to figure out, but you can read reports, or, in the case of NCT and some other organizations, that they have rationales for why this book is important for kids to read. There's a lot of work that, as Annie was saying, that people who in their jobs maybe have more time for that, can gather the stuff. They give it to you as a teacher, so it gives you some background knowledge on it. So I think that that is a super important part of, everybody has to do their part on these issues, and this teacher's part is one thing, a national organization's part is another thing, and everybody working together from different ways in, I think, can help get voices raised and help change the conversation.
I think there is also power in understanding professional organizations that are most relevant to current practice, and also thinking about connectedness within and among organizations that could be of support to a person in an educator role, no matter what that looks like, school-based, community-based, what have you, and just being willing from an educational standpoint to have those conversations with people who those types of professional organizations can support. Because so often, depending on where a person is serving and how they're serving, folks just may not know that there are other people in the world who they might find connection with to elevate things that are important to them, and or discover things that could be an asset for their professional work, similar to what you were talking about, Kathy.
Right,
and I
thank
know-
you. Yeah, we're definitely hearing that from teachers. So there's a time issue. We know that the demands of teachers are increasing. And in a lot of places, teachers do not feel comfortable to have that voice. So we really appreciate a lot of the work that goes on in tandem with the work that teachers do. I think we have time for one more question. So this one says, I see a systematic attempt to dismantle local teachers unions that teachers can sometimes feel isolated. Any attempt to advocate. So this kind of goes back to the previous question as well. So what recommendations do you have for the actual teachers who have to conduct this covert advocacy?
I'm loving that term, covert advocacy. And I think I want to keep going back to what we talked about in terms of allies, right? There are occasions in which a teacher can say something and will not be heard, but if a parent says that same thing, the parent will be heard. So I think part of this covert advocacy is developing allies, identifying the decision makers, and thinking about who can best speak to a decision maker, realizing that it's not always you as a teacher. So I know we don't have much time, so I could go on for about an hour on that, but that is a short answer from me.
Yeah, I try to be the loud advocator so that if people have to be covert, I could be the one that they like, okay, she could help me out. And like, so I don't know how to do covert advocacy, but I know that if you need to, I got you. And I think we need people on that other end as well. You need, yeah, like Kathy mentioned, like find someone who can speak and you pass your message to them if you're not able to do that. And there are people willing to do that.
It is so important to know your circles of influence and know your village. And as we see in distributive leadership in a lot of endeavors, know the right shoulders to tap on when you need certain voices elevated, or certain advocacy in creative ways.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you guys. That was one of my, I think, favorite questions that we got from you. Are you okay with one last quick? It doesn't have to be quick, but one last question. Okay. Jessica Ellison, our executive director, always likes to end out on a hopeful note. So
Yeah.
that is one of the things I've learned from her. I want to hear kind of, we've heard a lot of hope, but is there anything specific that you can tell us about what gives you hope in the world of advocacy?
Teachers. I see so many teachers who are doing such amazing, important work right now. Um, I I just love hearing their stories. I get energy from the energy of teachers who have made a little difference, and a little difference leads to a bigger one. So I think it's, for me, it's the teachers and the good work that people are doing.
Yeah, I mean, seeing people um advocate, even if I'm not the one doing it, just seeing other people do it in my tiny little town, or seeing my students say something and I'm like, oh my gosh, okay, yeah, this will be okay. Like, you guys are gonna be all right. This is great. It's always little tiny things where I'm like, oh, look at that. It's a little pocket of hope here. Oh, it's somebody um, that I see with like their, ally sticker on this thing in my little town. And I'm like, all right, I see you. Like, this is great. Um, we have to keep our eyes open for those little things too, though. So we have to be on the lookout for hope, but it's there.
I know it is always important to remember that hope lies in the depths of the interconnectedness of the world. And I think it is indeed those bridges that sometimes are seen or unseen that keep me going, to know that there is always someone in our corner, and it's important to always find more people to help elevate the things that matter the most.
I love that. And I'm thinking of the teachers that I've met as a part of my job at NCHE who have come to me struggling with knowing how to advocate for themselves, whether it's their professionalism, it's what they're teaching. And it's making me feel very warm and fuzzy to know that they have you folks in their corner, in whatever proverbial sense that might be. I know that we barely kind of scratched the surface of all the things we could talk about with advocacy, and this hour went by very quickly, but I want to thank you for all of the, the hope that you've given me and the insights that you've given the people in the chat here and the folks who are watching after the fact. You have so much rich experience, and thank you for all the work that you're doing in this really important time, and with all the folks that get to see this, because I know that all of you will end up creating ripples that you might not necessarily see, but it's going to affect the kids and their learning, which is the most important thing. So thank you for everyone for being here and being a part of the questions in the chat. And that's all I got. Thank you. We appreciate your time tonight, and I will send out those resources after the fact to the people who have registered here. Thanks again, and enjoy the rest of your night.
Thank you.
Thank you.